greetings to everyone. We're in between evening and late afternoon, so I'll just say greetings. To the diehard who made it out despite a few flakes. I made it here via Syracuse, so this really ain't nothing at all for me, unfortunately. But thank you for coming, thank you for making it, and enhancing the acoustics of the auditorium with human bodies. I've been told that I need to announce that for you folk who tweet, it's hashtag Bin Wahad at Tufts. Hashtag Bin Wahad, that's BINWAHAD, at, spelled out, AT, Tufts. And you should know how to spell Tufts, right? So that's it, right? So if you want to communicate with those who couldn't be here, and a few folks hiding from flurries maybe, you know, you can tweet. And hashtag Bin Wahad at Tufts it is. So we should begin probably by thanking the sponsors who helped make the event possible in very little time, as it turns out. Me, myself, personally, I definitely want to thank Lisa Lowe. I'm not sure I would have undertaken the task without that support. And we need a big, booming voice that can balance out the effects of Scalia last semester. There are no black Scalias. If you tallied up all black people there was and ever will be, they will not amount to a Scalia in terms of that negativity. So we don't want to get that twisted. But we do need to begin the task of balancing out certain negative forces of the universe. And so that's why we have this special guest here that we have today. So let us thank the sponsors. If you look at the beautiful flyer that was designed and delivered to us by the beautiful Cynthia, the Administrative Assistant in American Studies, you'll see that our sponsors are the Tupin Bolwell Fund, the Africanist Studies Program, the American Studies Program, the Asian American Center, the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy, the English Department, the Latino Center, Peace and Justice Studies, the Sociology Department, and last and most definitely not least, the student force represented here to the utmost, the Pan African Alliance. Who is Dhoruba Bin Wahad? For those of you who don't know, if your education system has failed you and continues to fail you, a truly remarkable writer, speaker, and thinker, Dhoruba Bin Wahad was a leading Black Panther activist and is currently a live Pan Africanist who grew up in New York with both a Caribbean and a Southern Black background. The state knew him first as Richard Moore. Often I identify him to those unaware as perhaps the one in the notorious Panther 21 trial of the early 1970s, when governmental forces moved to lock up every leading member of the New York chapter of the Panthers, a roster with which you might already be familiar, since his comrades included Afeni Shakur, mama of course to Tupac, Joan Bird, Columbia University professor of practice Jamal Joseph, or the recent author of Panther Baby, and Sundiata Acoli, not to mention Assata Shakur, that now 21st century maroon woman who remains a political refugee in Cuba. We read in T.J. English's The Savage City that the name Dhoruba is a Swahili one, which means, appropriately enough, he who was born in the storm. COINTELPRO is an acronym for the Criminal Counterintelligence Program of J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, and it often functions as a kind of shorthand for covert state repression at large. The state would lose the New York or Panther 21 case in a swift and embarrassing acquittal, but it did its damage in many ways. It robbed the movement of activists, leadership, and organizing time, and it did not stop. Ultimately, it took 3 trials for it to convict Dhoruba Bin Wahad of something in 1973, when it sentenced him to 25 years to life in prison. In 1975, however, he filed a historic lawsuit from prison against the FBI and the police department in New York City, prompting the release of more than 350,000 pages of COINTELPRO documents liberated in a historic raid by progressive activists just several years earlier. Last month, some of those raiders stepped forward to reveal themselves publicly for the first time in over 4 decades, as many activists celebrated their valiant act that led to important, if unpublicized, congressional hearings which exposed U.S. state criminality, but led to the prosecution of absolutely no one for state murder, for false imprisonment, or for forced exile. In other words, for the local and federal governmental conspiracy to destroy the modern black liberation movement in particular. When he was freed from what George Jackson called the inside prison and released without bail in 1990, after 19 years as a political prisoner, Dhoruba Bin Wahad would proceed to exact settlements from both the US government and the city of New York in the aftermath of the storm, in 1995 and 2000 respectively. He consequently and conscientiously founded a campaign to free black and new African political prisoners, as well as the Institute for the Development of Pan African Policy after moving to Ghana for over a decade and a half. Indeed, on several occasions, he has appeared before the UN Commission on Human Rights and its Special Committee on Decolonization as an NGO representative. He has helped organize several international forums on political prisoners and US human rights violations as well. Having worked with scores of war refugees in West and Central Africa in search of asylum, Dhoruba Bin Wahad is today an advocate for the establishment of an all-African refugee and relief foundation, spanning the continent and the diaspora, and operating under the auspices of the African Union. As an undomesticated scholar, or a pedagogue of the oppressed, Dhoruba Bin Wahad's written work appears in numerous publications, from Covert Action Bulletin to The Black Scholar and many more. In 1993, he would collaborate with Mumia Abu-Jamal and Assata Shakur on the semiotext book publication, Still Black, Still Strong, Survivors of the War Against Black Revolutionaries, which is actually for sale, limited copies, right at the top of the auditorium. A proud Muslim, an unparalleled and most grassroots intellectual, in the great tradition of Harlem and Roxbury's El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, or Malcolm X, of course. He continues to write what no one else can or dares to write, for various black periodicals in the US, as well as continental African and Middle Eastern newspapers. It is no wonder then that his historic experiences have been featured in 2 award-winning documentaries, Framing the Panthers in Black and White and Passing It On, The Black Panther Search for Justice. For all these reasons and many more, it is my great pleasure to introduce to you Dhoruba Al-Mujahid Bin Wahad.
First of all, I want to thank our brother Greg for inviting me here to Tufts University. This is a historic institution. I did a little research on it, but I'm not going to go into that. I'm glad to see that, given the weather outside, that there are a number of people that were interested enough to come here and snare at me. So I really appreciate the invitation and given the opportunity to talk to young students and young people. I always kind of get a thrill out of that because there's such a world of hurt outside that requires fresh minds and new thinking and a new attitude. And so, again, I just want to thank my hosts and the organizations that pitched in to bring me here. I want to talk about the consolidation of white supremacy in the post-civil rights era under the guise of democratization and freedom, under the guise of anti-racism. I think that in order to understand where we are at today, we have to do, as Malcolm X said, examine history, because history is the best subject to reward all research. Now, history, of course, is a combinate word in the English language. It means his story. So the ladies here, the women here, shouldn't feel slighted by the fact that history is decidedly sexist and chauvinist. Decidedly anti-feminine and anti-female. But we also have to understand that women have contributed both to the triumphs and to the woes of humanity. So having said that, I want to state my position that I am giving this overview not uncognizant of the role that sexism and oppression of women have played in this society. The fact that I don't emphasize it in this particular talk doesn't mean it didn't play a significant role in the repression and the curtailment of true democratic freedoms in this country. I just wanted to get that out the way because a lot of times when I get into discussing white supremacy and race and its institutionalization in foreign and domestic policies, we have usually the white feminists raise their hands and then take the conversation into a whole different area, and we have to deal with that. So this is not to diminish the impact of male chauvinism, of sexist institutions on women, and especially women of color. And it's also, I would like to emphasize too, that some of the foremost freedom fighters in our struggle, especially in the Pan African movement, have been women. They have been in the forefront of the struggle, whether it's political or armed or social. They have been in the forefront and have set the tone for many of the triumphs that we enjoyed and have enjoyed since the end of formal colonialism in Africa and formal slavery here in the United States. So having said that, I want to take you back in time to the beginning in 1974, when the Senate held hearings on the counterintelligence program. It was called COINTELPRO. How many in the audience here, with a show of hands, have heard the acronym COINTELPRO and have an understanding of what it means? I'm in a political science major. I could cut to the chase on a lot of things I have to say. I don't even have to break it down, right? We could cut to the... Yeah, that's good. That's good. I'm going to make certain assumptions then. I'm going to assume that everybody understands that the counterintelligence program in the United States comes from the acronym counterintelligence, which is a strategy and an art of war. So COINTELPRO had as its target, initially, the so-called Communist Party, early labor organizers at the beginning of the 20th century. And its aim was to disrupt and to weaken these organizations under the proposition, or behind the proposition, that these organizations, the Communist Party USA, represented a foreign government, specifically the Soviet Union or Russia. That they were agents of the Soviet Union. And this was before the Cold War. This was before the so-called Cold War. I don't want to get into that yet, because the Cold War was very instrumental in determining how the counterintelligence program was applied against black people in the United States and against Africans abroad. But we're not there yet. COINTELPRO was initially against the Communist Party USA and the left. Paul Robeson was an early target of COINTELPRO, as were the early labor organizers in the United States and the early Communist Party leaders. COINTELPRO then was not specifically designed or aimed at the African community. The repression that black people have faced in this country historically predates the counterintelligence program that was aimed at the Communist Party in the early 1920s, 1930s, 40s, and 50s. On the plantations in America, in the South, in the antebellum South, the rule of white supremacy was based on one primary factor: fear, terrorism, intimidation, absolute physical violence and control over people of African ancestry. The terrorism that was carried out during the years of slavery was institutionalized, regularized, and legalized into slave codes, into laws that permeated the very fabric of the American character. I know many of you have heard the old notion, the old saying, axiom, that the West was won by the maker of Colt revolvers, that God created man and Samuel Colt made them equal. You've heard that. Well, the United States, a European settler colony, European settler state, a spin-off of the United Kingdom, or at that time England, the Empire of England, as it expanded westward, as it began to take control of the North American continent, began to institute an institution of agrarian chattel slavery that was based on terror, fear, and physical threat of violence. It was a period in which black people, African people, were fully employed. There was no such thing as an unemployed African. Contrary to what you might think now. We had full employment. We didn't get paid for it, but we had full employment. But the primary disadvantage of chattel slavery was that the victims of chattel slavery, the chattel slaves themselves, did not have the ability or the capacity to accumulate wealth based on their labor. The accumulation of wealth would become vital and very important when we begin to understand the drug wars in the United States later on in the 20th century, when we begin to understand the demographics of urbanization in the United States and the relationship between the black working class and the white working class in America, when we begin to understand how race, education, and labor come together, we will understand that the basis for all the disparity ultimately comes down to the fact that people of color cannot or never have accumulated wealth. It's the accumulated wealth of the 1% of this society. It was the robber barons, the Vanderbilts, and all those guys that you read about that built America, that gave them the wherewithal to fashion the political system that we are now laboring under. We're told that we're living in a system or under a system of democracy, a unique system that makes us a very special people on this planet, that endows us with freedoms and dignity as human beings. But what they don't tell you is that the United States practices the only system of democracy that's based on elite control by those who've accumulated wealth. The electoral system of politics only exists in America. There is no such thing as majority rules on the national level. We know that from a few elections ago, when one individual won the election and the Supreme Court gave it to another. The electoral college system means that you could win a majority of the popular vote and lose the election. So democracy is a sham. It's a joke. It was meant to control the masses of working people in America. And that control, that struggle to control the working people in America is at the crux of why the counterintelligence program was initiated. It's at the crux of how mass incarceration came about. To control the working class, the working people of America, to keep them divided, to keep them from working in their own interests and creating institutions that would genuinely empower them, was the objective of the counterintelligence program. It became that objective as the United States became an urban and industrial power. So, the practices that were carried out on the plantation, we all, black folks know how white folks used to do on the plantation. They used to get one Negro and pit him against another. They'll get a pork chop preacher who sit up and tell you that, you know, we're going to get to heaven in the sweet by and by. We should endure right here. And Master Charlie, he don't mean no harm. He a good master. Look at the master down the road, man. He whip his slaves every day. Master here don't whip us. Y'all should be good niggas and go on out there and, you know, raise this quota. Huh? They had their techniques. Who was Stagger Lee? Who was the big black buck that they was always afraid of? The Mandingo character. How did they handle him? Huh? They hung him from a tree right by the road and lashed him to death as an example to the rest of the black males that if you act out like him, if you think you can whip us, this is what happens to you. Violence, terrorism was at the basis of controlling African people in this country for over 150 years. And it was inculcated into the Southern culture and mentality of white folks who have an expectation that they can commit violence against people of color and get away with it. This expectation is what drove J. Edgar Hoover to carry out a program of repression against the black nationalist movement in the United States and label the movement violent black nationalist hate groups. The people that he was murdering and repressing and putting in prison, he labeled them hate groups, violent prone. J. Hoover. I mean, who was it that said that the United States has no problem calling on black folks to be violent in defense of the United States, but when they be violent in their own self-defense, it's a crime? Understand something. What I'm trying to get at here, and I gave you a very rhetorical overview about the terrorism that has hovered over African people from the moment we were brought to these shores, through the crucible of slavery, through Jim Crow sharecropping system, a feudal system that was implemented after the Civil War to maintain the servitude and the subservience of African people, especially in the South. It was that system that led to the great northern migration of African people to the north, to Chicago, to New York, to Detroit. What do you think black folks was running from the South from? They was running from them crackers. They was running from that oppression. They were looking for a better life, and where did they go? They went to the centers of industrial power where the robber barons who had accumulated wealth had created industry and created jobs. And the jobs that they created was jobs that the industry needed. The industry that made America great no longer needed chattel slaves. It needed wage slaves. And wage slaves must be educated. And what was the primary prohibition in slavery? If a slave learned how to read, you killed him. Teaching a slave how to read was a felony. Under chattel slavery, education was a crime. Under industrialization, education became necessary. Understand this now. Because all the beasts that we have today, what are the beasts we got today? Educational system is inadequate in the inner city. What are the beasts we have today? Unemployment is double in the black community as in the white community. What are the beasts we have today? There are more people. I could go on, right? Yeah. All of these problems, all of these beasts have their history on the plantation and in the beginning of the 20th century when the United States government went after the left in this country and the organization of labor. So having said all of that, let me address right now where we're at and some of the things that you can begin to do to change where we're at. And then let's open up the dialogue. Let's open up the conversation so I can hear some of the things that you have to say and some of the questions that you have to ask. Because although I was invited here to lecture, if there's one thing I hate lectures. So, especially for somebody who don't have a degree. See, I'm an elitist, you see? But no, seriously, I want to, let's interact some more. We're trapped by the snow. We might not never get out of here alive. And so, we might as well learn to live together in this microcosm of America right here. Because you could believe if we couldn't get out of here, boy, how would we work? I heard the sister was talking about they have elections. They try to figure out how not to have a leader. How do we not elect a leader? Check that out. That's how democratic y'all done got. But we don't need no leader. Oh, everybody that don't want a leader, raise your hand. Everybody raise your hand. Okay, so nobody's leading. So what are we going to do? I suggest that we break for lunch. Who do you think you are? I'm not hungry right now. Why do we have to break for lunch? In fact, I'm a vegan and I just wanted to break the ice a little bit because I don't want y'all to take yourselves too seriously. And I don't want you to take the people that are in power too seriously. One of the things that one of the things I learned from some old hippie friends of mine, Abby Hoffman and Dana Beal and some old hippie friends of mine, was that one thing that people in power despise and hate the most is being laughed at. And being laughed at in public. If you laugh, back in the old days, if you laughed at a Roman emperor, that was your butt. You was going to the line. Straight away. You didn't even have to stop and say, but it was a joke. So, I want you to understand that whatever you do in the future as a political science person, as an activist, please keep your sense of humor. Make sure that your strategy includes demeaning the oppressor. Taking his clothes off of him or her. Making them look like buffoons. That this is an important strategy. Because if one thing that I learned about the white American male, very insecure. Extremely insecure. If you don't believe they're insecure, look at what happened in Florida with Dunn. If you don't believe they're insecure, look what happened to Trayvon Martin. They're very insecure. You say, well, how was that proved insecurity? What was the first thing they took away from the Africans on the plantation? Boom, 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 boom. The drum. The drum was bang. Well, the Negroes are communicating with the drum. And there's something in the drum that gets into you because it's the heartbeat. It's like the heart. It's like the beat of rhythm of nature. Everything in nature has a rhythm and a beat to it. And Africans, when they came, they had solace in the drum. And the oppressor understood the significance of the drum because one plantation could communicate with the other if they had the drum. So we switched it to spirituals. And call a holler and response. Oh, oh, steal away, at 8 o'clock. You see? But it was the drum. It was the drum. And what did Dunn say about what drove him crazy? When he confronted these youth who had this loud music on and the thumping bass that had the doors vibrating. It was the drum that drove him crazy. He got a flashback to his old slave master days. He got a flashback. See, that's why they elected Obama, because they knew he ain't had no flashbacks in him. He had a flashback to them Negroes with drums. He felt threatened. I could go into some other psychosexual stuff that I won't go into now. But believe me, all of this was why he irrationally responded the way he did. Now, suppose it was me, and I heard some hillbilly music, which, by the way, I do like country and western. I'm more eclectic than the Dunns. But let's just say I didn't like hillbilly music or some country and western. And the guy was saying, I'm a redneck, I'm a redneck. He's playing this music. I said, man, turn that crap down. He said, man, I'm a redneck. I suppose I should pull out my mag, my Glock, and put 5 in his bow tie, right? I should just shoot him. I mean, like, I can't leave this guy. I can't get out to space with him. I'm trapped with him or something. But the irrationality of it is that the entire American population watches this drama and is dumbfounded. They don't know how to explain it. The governor says we got to pass an ordinance for noise control. This is the governor. Actually, I mean, the dude actually said that. This is a grown man elected to office that said after the murder of this young boy over loud music, well, we got to pass a new ordinance to make it against the law to turn your volume up past 5. Really? That's what you had to say about this? Really? First of all, Florida already has anti-noise ordinances, like most states. But beside that, the subtle message that he's sending is, I am not going to second guess an American jury to let a white man off for killing a black kid. Because if I did and say, man, it's a tragedy, white folks would think I am anti-white privilege. Because how could it be a tragedy? That means he was wrong. He couldn't have been wrong because the jury didn't convict him. If there were no other kids in the car, he would be walking. We need to understand that white supremacy and white skin privilege is something that you take for granted, but that other people paid for with their blood, sweat, and lives. It's an attitude that you take for granted, that when someone stands up to you and brings your attention to this, I bet you can't guess who that is. It's my wife. And I didn't plan that. Sometimes it helps out, you know, when you want to get reorientated in the discussion, and that happens, and you know, but not that. So, the reason why I'm bringing this out, because look at all of the atrocities that we are faced with today, and we just take the attitude of, well, what are you going to do? We are confronted with an empire, and we are living in an empire, that is conducting wars around the world, some by remote control, others by proxy soldiers, and some by direct involvement. The United States has over 720 bases around the world. 700 military bases around the world. At least 112 military alliances, some you know about, many you don't know about, with foreign governments, intelligence units, and other institutions around the world. This is an empire, brothers and sisters. This is what I call New Age imperialism. And the reason why I call it New Age imperialism, because it's imperialism with a beat. It's imperialism with a style. It's imperialism with internationalism. You know, we have international heroes and sheroes. We got Beyonce. We got Jay-Z. We got all of these icons of materialism. African people have a generation of young folks that have access to more excess wealth than at any time in the history of African people's history in the diaspora. And what do they do with it? They buy more Bugattis. I woke up in a new Bugatti. Or, you know, bury me in a what? Bury me in a jewelry store. What is it?
She checked your mirror. Gucci store.
Gucci store. That's even worse. Check that out. I mean, look at all these corporations that's getting all of this free branding. And then when they come up and say, well, you know, these thugs are buying your product, the first thing they say, we don't appeal to these thugs. We appeal to people with taste and class. They reject these same knuckleheads that are putting this material message forward. The point here is that these atrocities are occurring while you are citizens of an empire that are doing these things in your name. They're doing these things in your name. As we speak, there are drones flying over Somalia. There are drones flying over Eritrea. There are drones flying over the Congo. There are U.S. troops fighting the Boko Haram in northern Nigeria. There are French troops being reintroduced into the Congo. There are American troops in Mali. The United States has been involved in the overthrow of at least 2 regimes in the last 2 years. We were watching kids being shot down in the streets. People black men knocking on the door trying to get help in a car accident, having their brains blown out. And the white man saying, well, I felt threatened. I thought he was going to rob me. Every black man that rolls up on you is about to rob your ass, huh? This goes beyond the idea and the notion that somehow we have to change the laws. Because you got to remember that stand your ground applies to black people too. Stand your ground. Stand your ground applies to black folks too. You just ain't gonna get the benefit of the doubt when your ass get in the courtroom. So you might as reconcile that you holler at your boys up in the penitentiary and say, yo, dog, I'm coming. It's either there or the cemetery. Take the penitentiary. Personally now, after having gone what I've gone through, I'll take the cemetery. But that's my personal preference. What I'm saying to you, we've had leaders like Al Sharpton. We've had leaders tell us that the stand your ground rule, the stand your ground law, is what we need to repeal. Because it's the stand your ground law that gives these racists and these reactionaries the opportunity to carry guns and kill black people and kill somebody for no reason whatsoever. Sounds good on the surface, but the fact of the matter is that the stand your ground law is an extension of your right to defend yourself in your domicile law. And the only reason it was passed in the first place was to extend the domicile of the individual outside the house, because more white folks are carrying guns than ever before. And the reason why most white folks are carrying guns than ever before is because they feel threatened by black people and people of color and immigrants as never before. So the stand your ground law was designed for gun owners to use the same principle of standing their ground in their house, outside of their house, to defend themselves. You have the same right. Black people got the same right to stand their ground. But how many black folks you know are going to make the same assumptions based on race that white folks make? How many black folks you think are going to make the assumption that a normal-looking white person, an old lady with, red hair or pink hair, sitting in the airport is not a terrorist? Who? I mean, who? Now let that same old lady look like Madeira and be mumbling some stuff to herself, and somebody call the police. I think there's an unstable lady over here. She's mumbling to herself. She looks like I feel very uncomfortable around her. And the police will come over, ma'am, can we talk to you for a minute? You see, why you want to talk to me? And one thing, it all goes downhill from there. Well, you know that happens, right? So how many black folks have called security at the airport and said, there's an old white lady over here mumbling to herself, I think she's a terrorist? Y'all don't do that. Y'all better start. The way you break stereotypes is to flip it on them. Flip it on them. Flip it on them. Assumptions are being made based on how we are being acculturalized. And the beauty of the counterintelligence program when it was implemented is that it came along at a time when white people in the United States were terrified about the upsurge of the black civil rights and human rights movement. That's when it was transferred from the left and fear of communism to fear of a black uprising and revolutionary movement in the United States. And then we have to remember too that the children of the United States ruling elites, the families, the white kids who are going to college, who are growing up, who are being subjected to the draft, has started to rebel. They started to smoke dope, drop acid, trip out. They even started dancing to black music. Look how far we come. Now white girls are twerking. So we know that there's a linear thing here going on in terms of culture, and in terms of politics, and in terms of repression. In terms of repression. Because the type of repression that's going on now, when the NYPD can say that it is infiltrating masjids, it is surveilling innocent Muslims who are not doing anything to anyone. It is mapping the Islamic community. It's intimidating people of color and people who have a different religious persuasion. When the borders of the United States, the southern borders of the United States are turned into demilitarized zones, when this is all happening right before your very eyes and no one says anything. You're not outraged by the revelations of the NSA. You're not outraged. In fact, you get on Twitter and Twitter about it. Me, the only good thing about it is if you lose your phone book, you can ask the NSA, put it back on. Say, yo, I lost my phone book. Sprint said they can't get it. Could you hook a brother up? That's the only good thing about it. You are living in the age of information that is unprecedented. Unprecedented. You have so much information that you don't know what to do with it. To the point where information used to be intelligence, now information makes you stupid. You could have all the information in the world and you have a governor come up and say that we need a new noise ordinance after a black kid is gunned down for no reason. Nobody's outraged by this statement. Who's outraged? Anybody take to the streets? Are people calling for this government, this governor's apology and recalling him, trying to recall him? Just imagine. And I know this is going to cause some controversy in Tufts. Yeah, I know it's going to go. Maybe I should call wifey back before I do this. Just imagine, you know, that a Jewish kid was walking down the street, and he was decidedly, visibly, you know, Orthodox or Jewish. You know, he had locks, yarmulke, and everything. Walking down the street. He's got his earphones on, he's, you know, he's minding his business. And along comes a group, maybe 3 or 4 black kids. And they call this boy a name. They call him a derogatory, quote, anti-Semitic name. Okay? There's some witnesses there that hear them call the boy the name. The boy got earphones on, he can't hear nothing. So he don't even know he got called his name. Right? And the boy's got earphones on. He's, you know, and they go by and he looks at them and he's not paying attention. He steps in the street to get run over by a car. Right? And the boys see him getting run over, they run away. Right? They just run away. They don't want to be involved. They don't be asking questions about it. They run away. Investigation goes down. The witnesses said that these boys made some anti-Semitic slurs and called this boy some anti-Semitic names, and he ran out into the street and they chased him and he got hit by this car and they ran away. That's a plausible explanation for that scene, ain't it? Isn't it? Silence. The only reason it's plausible is because of the protagonist. Nobody's paying attention to the details. They just see the black kid, the white guy with the yarmulke and the earphones on, and him rolling into the street and the kid's running away. Conclusion, they chased him, they were harassing him. It was a racial attack that killed this boy. You remember the Central Park jogging case? Do you remember how those boys were railroaded? And do you remember how the entire black community turned on those boys and believed that? I had to take my son and sit him down on the television and let him watch a black man sit in the police station and let the white cop frame his son and tell his son to say what he's telling you to say. And the boy is telling his daddy, Papa, I didn't do this. I didn't do it. He said, tell him what he got to hear so you can go home. The boy spent 9 years in jail. His daddy sat there and put him in jail with this cracker. His daddy believed the worst to him. Those people believed the worst of those black kids. They assumed the worst of those black kids and the best of attribution to the kid with the yarmulke and the earphones on. He was a knucklehead for stepping in the street in the earphones and didn't hear nothing. He caused his own demise. It was unfortunate. It shouldn't have happened. It's a bad thing. But it wasn't nobody's fault but his. We make assumptions. We make assumptions based on what we are told and what we are led to believe. And in fact, that is not the deal at all. That's not the deal at all. Look at the Olympics in Sochi. Obama has bent over backwards to show how pro-gay and lesbian rights he is. He put the head of the delegations that were decidedly gay and lesbian outspoken gay and lesbian athletes as his official representatives in Sochi to send a message to the anti-gay, homophobic Russians, right? That America was about freedom and dignity for everybody, right? Isn't that why he sent them? Bullshit! Because the reason why the Olympics would be attacked in the first place is not because the Russians are anti-gay. They're going to be attacked because the Russians are oppressing people in Russia who've been fighting for their freedom and their liberation for over 100 years. That Stalin had moved entire populations out of their homeland in the Caucasus, relocated them, slaughtered their men and women for years. And these people have been fighting the Soviets and the Russians for years. Now, who are the Soviets and Russians? Are they Asian? Are they Chechens? Are they Muslims? No. They're white boys. They're Europeans. You think Tsar Nicholas was Genghis Khan? You think Anastasia, was Kublai Khan's sister? They're Europeans. The Soviet Union was an empire. And every one of those people's freedom fighters are on the Russian terrorist list. And they're also on the United States State Department terrorist list. So the Russians and the Americans have the same enemies. The Americans say, well, they're Al-Qaeda related. That's like the new, boogeyman word. Back in the days, it used to be communists. Then, back in my days, it used to be Black Panthers. You know they're Panthers, don't you? Code word, they hate white folks, they hate cops, they hate everybody. They love guns, violence. That's what you were told. Why do you think Obama gave a speech at that phony remembrance of the Civil Rights Movement where you have all these presidents sitting up there? If you notice the first Civil Rights Movement, there was no president sitting up there. When Sharpton calls that joint, everybody up there is the president, except Sharpton. And Obama stands up and starts talking about black history. Well, we know how Obama gets when he gets historical. We know how he changed the whole history of the Middle East when he stood up in the United Nations and talked about the state of Israel. Changed the whole history. Said, yeah, what region was that? So he got up there and he said, back in the days in the 60s, black people had legitimate beefs against police brutality. Go read his speech. They had legitimate complaints against police brutality, but there were individuals who used those legitimate complaints to mask their criminal activity and to carry out criminal acts. Now, who was he talking about? J. Edgar Hoover? He never said nobody's name, but we all know who he was talking about. Understand something. The reason why you have never heard the Black Panther Party in the dialogue of the Civil Rights Movement, in the dialogue of what happened, except in the flip, you see somebody marching, then you're gone. The Civil Rights Movement embraced a lot of things that people took to the streets, and there was even militants out there, and you see the Black Panther, and it's gone. There's a reason why. And the reason why goes back to the plantation. Because the contradictions that we're talking about here, whether it's stand your ground, whether it's racist violence, whether it's racism in the educational system, it's all based about one thing: fear of black men with guns. The fear of black people defending themselves against white supremacy. That is the issue. There is no other issue. Everything rotates around that. Anybody that study materialism understands there's internal and external contradictions. The internal is the basis of change, the external are the conditions of change. No amount of heat is going to turn a stone into a chicken. Incubation will turn a chicken egg into a chicken. It's the internal basis of that egg. They may look the same, the stone can look just like the egg outside. My point is, the contradiction that you're facing today in fear of black people and the reason why white supremacy and white skin privilege exist is fear of black manhood. It's fear of black people's right to self-defense. And that's key in a police state. Because the only monopoly for violence has to reside with the state, with the police. And the police are the major perpetrators of violence against black people. So there you have the contradiction. If a black person could stand their ground and defend themselves, and the policeman is abusing him, that applies to that situation. I believe this man is going to kill me. He put handcuffs on me. I put my handcuffs there, and then he started beating me. So I grabbed him and I strangled him with my handcuffs. You're going to get a murder beat because he's a cop. You had no right to defend yourself. Did you? Yes, you did. Yes, you did. The same way a soldier has a right under the Constitution of the United States not to follow an unlawful order, you have a right as a human being to defend your life if you believe it's in danger, even against the law enforcement. Even against law enforcement. So the stand your ground rule, you see, is something that law enforcement wants abolished too. Did you notice that? They're all opposed to it too. And you wondered why, how come the Popo and Sharpton wind up on the same side of the barricades on this one? Because the police understand that they routinely exercise excessive force. They routinely threaten the lives of black men. They routinely terrify us to the point where we believe we're going to be killed by this guy. And there's nothing that we can do about it. Now, I don't know how many black men in here have had that experience of being in that type of situation, or even anyone in here being in that type of situation. That's a very powerless situation to be in. It's a very helpless feeling to know that when you get in your car, you're driving while black. How many white folks here got to think about what they're doing when they leave the house every day? What they're going to wear? Well, I'm going to put my shades on, man, when I drive through Cambridge, or what? Me, I get the darkest ones I can get. You know? But you got to deal with that. And there's people that don't have to wake up in the morning and deal with that. And that's very hard for you to understand, to put yourself in that position. Yeah, back in the 60s, if you had long hair, and you know, and you listen to rock music, you were stereotyped too, and then you were subject to being a second-class Negro. They would treat you with some degree of stereotyping. But now everybody got long hair. Even the Popo. They got more tattoos on them than you and me. I don't have no tattoos, by the way, but they got more tats. They got longer hair, different styles. You can't tell the police from the people until they start oinking. That's the only time you can tell the difference. Up until that point, if they keep their mouth shut, you wouldn't know the pig from the people. That's serious. So what we're dealing with here is our expectations of people that have been created over a period of time where the excesses of government are no longer surprising, where everybody takes these things for granted. Nobody's outraged. We could go on YouTube right now and see kids being beaten by 2 cops in the middle of the black community and a whole crowd around them, and nobody would do nothing but yell and scream, "Stop beating him, stop beating him." That's it. Could you imagine? Look at the pictures they show you on the History Channel of Poland and the beating of Jews in the street with stars of David on their arm, and other people walking by while the fascists are beating them in the streets. How many of you were outraged by that they walked by? You were outraged, weren't you? How could they walk by? Look how they're beating that poor man. You see the pictures in the concentration camp and you're outraged by it, aren't you? But when you see a black man beaten down in the street, you're not outraged by it. When a black boy gets murdered, you don't come out into the street outraged. Why? Because you can't identify with that. The Occupy Wall Street movement didn't become what it became until a cop squirted mace in a white woman's face who was handcuffed. Everybody took to the streets. They were outraged. Black folks get mace sprayed in their face daily, on a regular basis. They spray mace in the face of retarded people. They'll spray mace on the face of people and kill them that got asthma. They don't care. White women got maced and started the movement. Huh? She shouldn't have been treated like that. That cop was an idiot, but we knew he was an idiot when he first drove up. You just didn't believe it. You just thought we don't like cops. That's all. You know, y'all just anti-police. They're just doing their job. Every time you see something where you have this injustice, someone always tries to come up and give you a rational explanation on why this cop shot somebody 27 times. He reloaded. He only got 14 shots. That means the knucklehead reloaded. Boom, 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 boom. He was upset. I mean, he was under pressure. He thought his life was, he shot a lifeless guy 14 more times. Really? You rationalize it. It's being rational. Nobody's outraged anymore. And that means it's the beginning of the end. You know, in Islam, Muslims are told, and a lot of y'all don't know much about Islam, but I'll tell you this. Muslims are told to stand up for justice, even if it is against their own soul. There's a passage in the Quran that says, O ye who believe, let there arise from among you a band of believers who will enjoin the good and forbid the wrong. Enjoin the good, forbid the wrong. You are in college. You are going to go out into this world. Hopefully, a better person because of this education, and maybe a better, more sensitive person because of this talk. But you're going to go out there. And I'm telling you, if you don't enjoin the good and forbid the wrong, we're finished. We're finished. You know what's right and wrong. You know it's wrong to murder somebody in a car because their music was loud. You know it's wrong. But you don't say nothing. You don't do nothing. You sit there and say, we sent a Twitter. Dunn's a bad dude. Twitter. End of the conversation. Then you'll have thousands of people in Brooklyn for Pussy Riot. And say, I got to go to this Pussy Riot concert. Pussy Riot. Right? They claim the fame is that they're bad musicians and they did their act in the church. And Amnesty International holds a fundraiser for them and the place is packed. Place is packed. They raise hundreds of thousands of dollars. And right now, as we speak in the United States, there are over a dozen black political prisoners who have been in jail for over 35, 40 years. Right here in America. Political prisoners. I know because they're all my comrades. So don't act like I read this. They're in prison. Nobody's outraged about this. No one. America doesn't have political prisoners, so that's not possible. These are criminals who were in jail. Well, don't forget now, George Washington was a criminal. He had a bounty on his head. If they would have caught that white-head, wood-tooth wearing dude, they would have hung him. He was a criminal, but he's a founding father today. Yesterday's criminals are today's heroes and sheroes. You can't look at what's being done in your name and don't do nothing. You can't do it because now, when you travel abroad and somebody hears that American accent, me, I don't eat in restaurants with Americans. I stay as far away from them as I can, especially tourists. When I go to the hotels in Nairobi or in Africa and they say, man, you don't want to go in that section of the city. Which one is that? I said, over there, man, the people that still, you know, it's really, especially after dark. Son said, well, I'll catch you later. That's exactly where I want to be at. I get the lowdown on them. So what's happening with Popo? The streetwalkers tell me what's happening with the police. The pickpockets tell me what's happening with the undercover agents. What's going on in the hotels and everything. Yeah. The criminal element. The dregs of society. The outcasts, the outsiders. The 2.5 million people who are now under lock and key in America. Over 50 million people in this country are under some form of state parole, probation, or surveillance. You're living in a police state, but it's all good because you have your liberal freedoms, you think. You think that when NSA is spying, it doesn't mean nothing to you because you ain't doing nothing. You fail to realize that today, what came out of COINTELPRO is this, that all citizens are potential criminals, are potential terrorists. They're not potential citizens of the empire who are going to do good. You're a potential terrorist. That's what they think about you till you prove otherwise. You're a potential criminal. So when they talk about surveilling your every move, listening to your conversations, monitoring your movements, they're not just invading your private space. They're invading your integrity as a human being. As a human being. As a free-thinking, sovereign human being. And that's what you should stand up for if you don't stand up for nothing else. Stand up for your own individual sovereignty. The right to think against the tide. To be different. To think outside the box. To change the system by destroying the system. You know, I have a theory that the only way you're going to save America is to destroy it. And what do I mean by that? It's like Humpty Dumpty. Remember the story of Humpty Dumpty? Real simple. You need to elect people to political office who don't want to be in office. Who don't care about being in office. Who don't care about winning the next election. They're on a mission. And their sole mission is to make it so that when they leave office, nobody be able to put that crap back together again. That's what you need. You need somebody that goes into the city government in Chicago and says, well, I tell you what, we're going to abolish the city council by referendum. Everybody that's down with it? Yeah, let's abolish. No more city council president. Hey, by the way, police chief, I know you're the best for the job. You've been through all of these things. You're highly qualified. But obviously, the system of police chiefing doesn't work in Chicago because it's got the highest murder rate in the country. See ya. Now, let's talk about public safety here. How do we organize it? Let the community organize their own public safety districts. Let them elect their own people to run the community anti-crime efforts. Reopen the firehouses and train these young men to be first responders in emergencies. Huh? Let's change the system in ways that they know they don't want to change it. Because the reason why they have a police chief is so that the mayor can control the violence in his community, the guns in his community. That's his personal army. Police chief don't do what he tells him to do, he's fired. Pure and simple. See. But if you organize decentralization of police, and each community has residency clauses, the cops got to live in the community they work in, first and foremost. The community elects its own public safety board and public safety supervisor for its district, and the district determines the policing requirements. The only thing that the governor or the mayor needs to run is the business district. The cops could have that. They could police that. Change the paradigm of power. Stop thinking in the box when you go to your business course or when you go to your institutional courses and they tell you this is how you proceed whenever you're dealing with this particular model. Throw the model out the window. Look at the teacher like, okay, what do I got to do to get an A on this course? I got to say A, B, C, and D, and E? Okay. You got that because I need to get out of here. Okay, give him what he wants, and then you say, you know, the teacher said, you know, your paper was brilliant. He said, I was waiting for you to tell me that. Because I got a real paper. I want you to tell me what you think about this. Let's discuss this with the class. This is completely opposite of what you wrote in your paper. Yeah, that's why I want to discuss it with the class. Think outside the box. Challenge these people that are teaching you to teach you something that will change this world. Instead of trying to make you a cog in the machine that keeps the world the way it is. Change it. And the only way you're going to change it is to understand history. And COINTELPRO, my friends, was the beginning of the end of what you see now. That was the beginning. Now you are in the end game. There's drones in our community now. You didn't say nothing when they was flying over Afghanistan. Now they're flying over Cambridge. And they're making them smaller and smaller. Now if you swat a fly and it's a drone, you kill the cop. Yeah. No. I know that sounds crazy. And on his face it's funny, but underlying it's really serious and it's poignant. Because, you know, an imam was killed in Detroit for shooting a police dog that was attacking him. And they said that he was shooting a police officer. The dog was doing his duty. The dog was put on him by the police officer in a lawful fashion. He shot the dog, and they responded by killing him. So the military and the police department are going to claim their technology. They're going to make destroying a drone a crime. They ain't going to let you, man, what is that drone? They ain't going to let you knock their drones down and get away. Really? They're going to have you on camera. Go out there, smash one of them cameras on the highway, and let them get your picture on there and see what's happening. They'll hunt you down like you was Osama bin Laden. So you need to understand that this technology is taking us to a whole different level of police state, of policing, of surveillance. And you are a generation of technology. You're a generation that grew up with cell phones. I remember when the cell phone used to be this big. You could beat somebody to death with a cell phone. No, the battery. Just the battery. You could beat them together. When you put the phone together, it was really lethal. Cell phones was this big. Really, seriously. You've grown up with cell phones. How many of you, the last time you put a quarter in a payphone? You can't even remember. Y'all walk, you probably don't even know how to use a payphone. Y'all walk. So and this is not a put down. I mean, my little 5-year-old beat me, man, in Madden 25. I can't get over that. He talking about, Pop, I'm going to blitz you. The blitz is coming from the block, and he be blitzing me. And I said, man, there's something wrong with this equation here, because I'm not, like computer illiterate or nothing. But a 5-year-old beat me at Madden, right? So I went, sneak out 2 o'clock in the morning and get on the controller and try to learn a couple of moves on the down low, let nobody in the house know I'm doing it. You see? And then when I play him, I knock him off one game and quit. Don't never play him. You understand? Because see, he's going to improve. His brain is growing and mine is shrinking. And so, sooner or later, it ain't no contest. So I'm going to leave it with that memory all his life. Daddy, in Madden 25. Sorry, son. But seriously, I'm going to end now, but I want you to really think about what I'm saying. I said this because you have no sense anymore of yourself as part of a community. You see yourself as existing only in as much as you're in communications with everybody else who exists. How many of you feel like you're not even in the world no more when your phone cut off? Lose your phone in your phone book and you'll almost have a nervous breakdown. Really? That's how much you are plugged into the matrix. Your personality and your sense of privacy is fundamentally different than the generation before you. And that's not bad. That has a lot of good things to it. Because now you can communicate with other people your age, any place in the world, and compare notes. And that's why governments want to control the internet. They don't want you comparing notes. They don't want you saying, hey man, I really ain't got no reason to be taking up arms, coming over there, killing you. What if they call a war and none of us went? Let them old bastards fight. Let them old guys up on Capitol Hill and pick up an M16 and go shoot each other. Why you gotta do it? Why do you do it? You need to think outside the box because now you have technology at your disposal that permits you to do what corporations used to do in the past. You could publish tomes on desktop. Back when I was coming up, you had to use a mimeograph machine. None of y'all even know what a mimeograph is. Y'all look at me like, if I describe a mimeograph machine to y'all, y'all gonna say, that's not true. That's not, you're just making that up. It was a drum with a stencil with ink on one side and paper on the other. You stretched the ink, the paper around the drum, and inside the drum went the keys. And then you plugged it in and it went and it kicked out the leaflets. Usually kicked them out so hard you had to get them off the floor. Always missed the track, right? And it kicked out the leaflets, and if it had one mistake, it would smear it, right? And all 5,000 leaflets would have that exact same mistake, right? And some machines were so that they had their own particular mistakes that came out no matter what you did. So the FBI used to be able to tell what mimeograph machine came from what Black Panther Party office based on the mistakes from the machine. It was analyzed. They had examples of Black Panther Party mimeograph machines. Trust me. Just when the electricity went off, you cranked it by hand. Now, when's the last time you did something like that with a computer? You know? So, you're a technological generation, take advantage of it, but understand that these revelations that are coming out about government spying are very, very threatening to your sovereignty as a human being. And unless you do something about it, we're done. Just like a turkey, stick a fork, it's over. So now, for those who feel that I babbled long enough, and they have these burning questions, let's take some. You wanna quarterback it? And let's make sure that the sisters go first. So.
Okay, so we can take a couple of questions at a time and then rotate for as long as we have. We want to save a little bit of time as well for folks to get copies of Still Black, Still Strong and ask Dhoruba to sign them if you're interested. So we'll keep those two tasks in mind. I feel like I'm in class all over again. So we have one question here and another question here. Can you just tell us your name and then ask your question?
Yes, my name is Catherine, and my question is, when you give these lectures, do you ever check for the reactions of white people or white-appearing people in the audience?
I guess that's a code word for am I sensitive to them? I'm very sensitive to them because I wouldn't want to be in their position. I'm very sensitive to them. I didn't mean that to be facetious or a joke. I am very sensitive to them. You know, to tell you a personal story, I know y'all saw, maybe y'all, did they see the movie? The documentary? I'm going to tell you a story. A young college student by the name of Robert J. Boyle came into Greenhaven Prison when I was in Greenhaven Prison, and I was kind of like the editor of the prison newspaper. And we had a Black Studies program. This is right after Attica. So right after Attica, they gave us a lot of programs. So we had a Black Studies program that was attached to the local college. It was Marist College in Dutchess County, New York. Right? And the students used to come in. And all of them were white. Excuse me. Young white students, you know, in their first year of college, because the college put on a program to come into the prison and work with prisoners towards in Black Studies, and that would go, you know, towards their grade. So this young kid came in, Robert Boyle, and I stood up before these kids. You know, I used to do the orientation, and I stood up before them, and I'm in prison now, so you know it's hard. You know I ain't pulling no punches. What, they gonna put me in jail? so they're sitting there much like you're sitting here, and I started talking about prison, and how prison wasn't any place to be somebody, and what it really meant, you know, in terms of the Black community and stuff like that. And these kids kept coming in, they kept working, and this one guy, Robert J. Boyle, he was kind of like exceptional. He took a lot of stuff to heart. He listened to a lot of stuff, you know. And then he started working with some prisoners over at Napanock Prison who were fighting the Ku Klux Klan. There was a Ku Klux Klan cell in their jail. And they were fighting the Ku Klux Klan, trying to reveal it, and he started working with them as a student, helping them outside with the support work, and it became a big case, right? And all the time now, he was motivated by his involvement with us in Black Studies in Greenhaven. Because of that, Robert J. Boyle decided to go to law school. He went to law school, and he hooked up with my attorney then, Liz Fink. Liz Fink was the Attica attorney for the Attica Defense Committee. Liz Fink is a Jewish woman whose parents were communists. And she was my lawyer. And he took it up and started working with her. It was those two individuals, Robert J. Boyle became a lawyer, and Liz Fink, that you see in the video, they're the ones that got me out of jail. It's because of them that I'm standing here now talking to you. So am I sensitive about white people in the audience? You goddamn right. You goddamn right. I hate to use the stereotype, but the people that saved my life were white. Because they believed in something and they acted on it. They believed that I was a political prisoner. He believed that he should fight for my freedom, and that's what he did. And he went to law school, got a law degree, in order to do it. Took him 7 years. But here I am, in all of my glory. And of course, needless to say, that's my best friend to this moment, to this second. He's my children's godfather. Their favorite uncle is Uncle Bob. You see? So my boys have been blessed because of the struggle, because of the movement. They have Turkish uncles, they have Arab uncles, they have Jewish uncles, they have Italian uncles, and they love them all. So, yeah, I feel for people who I lecture in this fashion because I know it's uncomfortable to them. You know? So it's not that I do this to make them uncomfortable or revel in their discomfort. I don't. So I just wanted to say that.
So he's referring to Passing It On, the documentary specifically on the struggles of the Panthers, his imprisonment and ultimate release from political imprisonment. And we have DVD and VHS copies that people look at me very strange when I present them. The VHS to
Yeah, I know. I have to take a double take on that myself.
Yeah, it was like I'm giving them a square circle or something. But for those of you who are interested, one, we can work on getting copies in the library, but also in the meantime, if you approach me, we can. I think last check, Cynthia was screening it in Eaton. It's like a downstairs movie theater. Jokes. But you can get a copy. You can check these out in the meantime. All right, and then Zoe. Yes.
So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about U.S. Border Patrol and our presence, like in the Dominican Republic, training Border Patrol agents over there, on the DR-Haiti border. Also, like, there was a really high up Border Patrol official who made a statement in 2011 about the southernmost U.S. border is actually the border between Guatemala and Mexico, and just this expansion of like militarized borders globally, wherever the U.S. has a presence, and the way that we finance and train.
I know, right?
Right?
Can you speak to that, please?
You did. You just did. Really? You really did. I think the only thing I could add to that is I don't think a lot of black folks, especially black leaders, recognize the implications of the immigration controversy and how it impacts on us. Some of the major deportees and some of the major victims of the new Immigration Acts are Africans. You know, the United States State Department and government only has a 27,000, I think 30,000 quota for sub-Saharan Africans each year, and these new immigration laws are going to reduce that because this is supposed to be a non-visa quota. In other words, you don't have to qualify like for a regular visa. These are, you know, where they have the lottery and stuff like that. So we're impacted by this. But something that you pointed out, and this is again, goes back to what I was saying about the militarization of police and how we don't say anything. The sister's absolutely right. The United States Homeland Security and Immigration wants to declare a 100-mile zone from any point of entry into the United States as a zone in which the Constitution doesn't apply, much like when you go to the airport. You know, when you go to the airport, you can be subjected to search and seizure of your property without any recourse to, you know, to law, you know, because they declared that a high security area and there's certain new laws that you know, that apply, you see. So she's absolutely right. I mean, what spot in the United States is not 100 miles from an entry point? When you consider almost what is it, 67% of the American population lives within 50 miles of a coastline? You know, so that's very, very important. But the militarization and the use of militias on the southern border, at the same time that this militarization is happening on the southern border, the U.S. is talking about integration with Canada on the northern border. Economic, military, and police integration. So we need to understand that the geopolitics of the United States and Mexico is changing. And now you know with the legalization of marijuana beginning to pick up steam, then law enforcement is in a serious dilemma. And the war on drugs is just about, it's almost over. And so everyone's scrambling on how they're going to get a niche on the next war on whatever is coming up next. And they're starting to talk about heroin now in order to deal with this. But we should understand, this is another lecture, that heroin was initially how the war on drugs started in the black community. It was against heroin. And heroin was introduced by our friends and associates that we all come to love and respect, the mafia. Our boys, hold me down from the Godfather and them, So we're going in full circle. Heroin now is the up and rising epidemic. Marijuana is being decriminalized. Before, marijuana was a gateway to heroin. I guess now heroin is a gateway to marijuana. I don't know. But, there it is. You're absolutely right, though. And the immigration issue is an issue that black people and other people should really be interested in, because the curtailment of immigration, right? This is an immigrant nation. And the fact that the immigrants are now being stigmatized and delegitimized should tell you a lot about where the empire is at right now. Because it's empire that created the influx of immigrants. Rome, everybody wanted to go to Rome. Hey, man, I'm going to Rome, man. I gotta get paid. Everybody going to Rome, man. You going to Rome, man? We all the way in, we all the way in Persia, man. How you gonna get to Rome, man? I'm gonna hitch me a camel. I'm out of here. You understand? Everybody wants to go to the center of commerce and the center of culture and civilization. And in this particular case, it's the United States, but the United States is closing its borders to immigrants. And it's immigrants that made this country, besides, of course, old black folks, but immigrants made this country. So we need to understand that immigration laws, is a placebo for a lot of racism, a lot of classism, and of course a lot of sexism. So it's a very important thing for us to pay attention to.
I'd just like to add really quick, I'm not here speaking today, about the publication in the back, Still Black, Still Strong. The subtitle is Survivors of the War Against Black Revolutionaries. It includes like 4 essays by Mumia Abu-Jamal, I think maybe 5 pieces by Dhoruba, and an interview with Assata Shakur. The pieces by Dhoruba speak in a different way, in a more pointed, extended, and elaborate way to a lot of the issues that deal with the state, counterinsurgency, repression, the national security state, of imperialism in general. And they represent essays that you don't see anywhere else. That kind of perspective that's belabored in that particular way, I've never seen anywhere else since, and I constantly go back to them. And one thing that I appreciate about certain figures that have been produced by the Black liberation movement in general, and the Black Panther Party in particular, is that they give us an ongoing tradition of intellectual praxis that we do not see in other places. A lot of the times when you do encounter these voices and these figures in the public marketplace through books, they're seen as capable of movement memoirs, one-off books that are, implicitly ghostwritten in people's perceptions and whatnot, as opposed to the actual alternative tradition of knowledge and politics that was the product of these social movements, right? And so that's why the lecture here is important, but also why the intellectual production in print is important as well. They go together, like the traditions of oratorical intelligence and also the traditions of written and printed intelligence, and you see that really clocking in all kinds of ways. So I really do strongly recommend people check out the work. And so we have 2 more questions, one Cooper and Phil, right? And then Benjamin.
Hi, I'm just wondering if you could talk about the role of Islam to you and the Black Panthers movement and how you see it is affecting future movements.
Oh, y'all gonna bring me back? Oh, y'all gonna bring me back to Revolution Islam and Black militancy in the 60s? I'm down. I'll do that. No, sir. That is a long, and it's kind of hard to, let me just say this. In the 60s, the Black Panther Party was one of the few organizations that expressed solidarity with liberation movements abroad. In fact, we had a working relationship with the PFLP in Palestine, the Palestinian Liberation Front, the Front for the Liberation of Palestine. At that time, it was led by Dr. George Habash. We also had a working relationship with with the FALN and other liberation movements we had a relationship with the ANC, but the ANC at that time was not perceived so much as an anti-colonial liberation movement, but more or less as an adjunct or a part of the Cold War dichotomy between the U.S. and Soviet Union, and South Africa was seen in that light. That's a whole different thing. We could see the developments of that, but in terms of Islam, the Muslim community back then, and we have to understand something, this was right after the Algerian Revolution, and a lot of people don't know. I think if for those of you who are political students or you are studying religion and politics, the Algerian anti-colonial struggle initially, the leading elements in it were Islamic. And a lot of people don't understand too that secular nationalism in the so-called, quote, Arab world was initially, and so-called Pan-Arabism was initially anti-British and anti-European colonialism. It was a ideological opposition. It was formulated for that purpose. The same way Pan-Africanism was formulated for the purpose of uniting the African continent. But all of this was hijacked by the Cold War, misdirected by the Cold War. So when the Black Panther Party expressed its solidarity with the Palestinian people, it was based on our analysis of Zionism and the history of Zionism. It wasn't based so much on our solidarity with Islam in terms of praxis and principles and intellectual understanding. I don't know if I'm making sense here. So, I mean, that's at that time. Now, if you're asking me in my personal life, I believe that the personal is political and the political is personal. And when I returned to Islam decades ago, it was because I felt that the whole sojourn as an activist, as a Panther, as a so-called materialist activist, lacked the spiritual dimension. The spiritual dimension was being hijacked by the legacy of the Christian church. You see? Whatever you want to say about faith-based activists, they tend to have a lot of enthusiasm. You know? And sometimes enthusiasm gets you over when nothing else will. You know? One of the reasons the Vietnamese didn't lose the war was because they didn't understand that they were supposed to. If they knew they were supposed to lose the war, they would have been done. So when I became involved in Islam, it was because Islam, and I was in prison, it was because Islam reflected a spirituality that mirrored and reinforced my politics and my ongoing analysis. And then I came to understand too, as a result of that, by understanding the religion itself and the holistic basis of the religion, that Islam was a very serious anti-imperialist, anti-oppressor theology. That it supported the overthrow of oppressors and tyrants. It didn't tolerate these things. It talked about the liberations of slaves and empowerment of women. This is what Islam talks about. The complete opposite of what you hear. Okay? And that's very, very important to understand, because when the Iranian Revolution jumped off, this is the first time in modern history that a theological proposition, a theological philosophy overthrew a modern national security state. Up until that time, it was just Marxist-Leninist, left or right, or whatever. This was the first time that Islam did that, that a religion did that. And it did that in a geopolitical sensitive part of the world, and it caught the United States and Europe completely by surprise. Completely by surprise. They've been backpedaling, trying to catch up ever since. That's why we're at where we're at with Iran and their nuclear program. They're talking about the nuclear program in Iran, talking about them thinking about it. They don't have it, they're just thinking about it. And the Israelis already got bombs. And nobody says anything. You bring that up in a conversation, it's like the room gets silent. It's like the 1,000-pound gorilla sitting in the room. Well, see that we want a nuclear-free Middle East. How many bombs do y'all got over there at Desmona? We can't talk about that. That's anti-Semitic. They ain't got nothing to do. We a democracy. The last time I looked, the only people that ever used an atomic bomb was a democracy. So Islam then in the Black Panther Party was based more on the synergy of our anti-imperialism and our work together against that particular entity, the European settler state of Israel.
And Phil, Thank you for coming. One question is about, you touched on earlier about twerking and Jay-Z and Beyonce, but you talk about Pan African global struggle and the contemporary music, I guess, that they come out in the 60s, 70s, and 80s was like rap and hip hop, and that's something that's been globalized and that's part of your resistance and struggle and so forth. But in the 90s, you see a capitalist takeover of rap music, and you see what we have now, and young black and brown youths get, I guess, mentally consumed by that in the classroom. So I wonder about your thoughts on that, as you kind of talked on it, and what is the solution to dealing with that capitalist takeover of rap music, and also if you could maybe touch on gentrification and the epidemic of gentrification in low-income neighborhoods and black neighborhoods.
Whoa! And each one of those things that you mentioned, brother, are very serious issues. And I don't want to treat them superficially. Really, I don't. I think that what he mentioned about rap music and the role that it could possibly play in progressive movements and where we are, I think that's a whole series. I mean, I'm going. In fact, that you mentioned it, and the fact that you mentioned it again helped me. It's going to help me emphasize. I'm going to enter into a dialogue with Davey D. Because Davey D has raised some of these very issues that you're talking about the relevancy of rap, its takeover by corporate interests. And I know for a fact that rap, how does my phone ring this long? Usually when I'm rushing to answer it, it goes off after the fact. And so the reason why I'm telling you this, because I'm going to engage in this dialogue probably in Facebook or some type of public forum so that you can tap into it. But he raised some very good questions about the role of culture, art, and human struggle and social change. What part does it take? And when we break down how hip-hop evolved and how it developed and what it came out of, we'll see that it came out of the same type of period that I was talking about when I talk about the late 60s and stuff. It came out of that period. Music has always reflected movements for social change. They usually reflected it. They didn't determine the movement. They reflected the movement. They inspired the movement. They informed the movement. But they weren't the movement. You follow me? I know y'all remember when South Africa, some of you might remember, when South Africa, apartheid was still in existence, all of the artists, well, almost all of the good artists were in exile. And they were performing fundraisers for the ANC, and their songs and music talked about what it was like to live in South Africa, to fight apartheid. We know about Miriam Makeba. We know all of these things, you see? Hugh Masekela, and all of these things. So music, and especially hip-hop, because when, I live in Ghana, and I happen to have raised the grandfather of Ghanaian hip-hop, Reggie Rockstone. Reggie Rockstone, well now, he's like in his 40s. He's the grandpapa of Ghanaian hip-hop. And so all of the kids that are hip-hop stars, rap stars in Ghana, I knew them since they were babies. So the lectures that I'm giving you, I used to give them in Ghana. So the reason why I'm saying that is because now they're presenters on TV shows, now they're doing shows and stuff, and all of their music does not reflect the colonial paradigm of Ghana. You see, it's talking about Africa belongs to the youth. They have a Pan-African flavor to their music, even though they like to dance and be jiggy and have fun and talk about smack, talk about nothing. At the core of their music is bigging up their culture and their Africanness. You understand what I'm saying? And I think that that's what's happening with rap music today. That stuff that we see with Beyonce and the commercialization of that music and how they dominate the dialogue and stuff is not indicative of the type of artists like the Latino artists and the black artists who have consciousness, who don't have a contract. And who a lot of y'all know because you go to their concerts and they're like underground. So it's very important to understand this co-optation because all of those rap genres in Africa reflect the reality of the people. Ugandan rap is different than Ghanaian rap. Ghanaian rap is different than Senegalese rap. Senegalese rap is different than the Congolese. They all got a different flavor and they all give a different message. But usually the message is not bling bling. Usually the message is about, you know, we came from the ghetto, we came from the shanty town, and we all family. It's these types of messages that's coming up, you see. So I'm going to have this dialogue with this very well-known hip-hop commenter and DJ, Davey D. And I want to have this dialogue precisely about what he's talking about, the relevancy of hip-hop culture to our struggle for freedom and liberation.
So if you don't know Davey D's massive website, which is like an international information highway in itself, you can easily find it. You know, it's Davey D. D is an initial. Do any search for Davey D's hip hop website, and it'll take you right there, and you'll find tons and tons and tons of information for probably like a decade now.
Yeah, I got a couple of articles on it, and that's the way I'm going to try to engage him in this dialogue on that website.
Okay.
So you all can see it.
And you can find Dhoruba on Facebook. Yeah.
Oh, I don't befriend nobody, though.
You don't befriend nobody, but you can find Dhoruba and Dhoruba's information on Facebook. When Dhoruba finds something important, he does post it on Facebook. Right. Okay. And Benjamin is next.
I just wanted to actually elaborate on Phil's question about justification, the second part he asked kind of at the end.
Yeah, I didn't address that, my bad.
Yeah,
He's working on that too.
So y'all working in tandem. I hear.
So at the sort of the end, we're talking about making community and creating community. And I'm from Chicago, and there, of all places, gentrification is going at a crazy rate. I mean, they knocked down Cabrini Green; it's a target now. The Latino community is being pushed into working class suburbs. And I guess my question is, can we create effective community if we're not geographically together?
Well, let me say this. I don't know how many of you have traveled to Europe. How many of you have traveled to like France or whatever? Okay, well, you know that the ghetto is in the suburbs.
Right.
The ghettos is in the suburbs is a consequence of French colonialism and gentrification that occurred in the 50s and 60s. So like Le Défense is outside of the periphery, outside of the center of the city. And all of the picturesque and tourist places are all in the city center. Right? It's like that almost everywhere that you go in Europe now. Same thing in Hamburg, in Cologne. The ghettos tend to be on the outskirts now. And urbanization in America proceeded. This is something that we don't really get into, and you don't hear nothing about how black leaders don't deal with it. But urbanization as a process in American culture and American economy directly impacted on race and class in the society. And where we wound up. How we wound up in Oakland. You know, how did we wind up in Detroit? How did we wind up in New York? What brought us there? When we got there, what was there? A lot of people don't know that the New York City Police Department started as a gang. And that the head gang member in charge became mayor and gave him a charter. Now they're the NYPD, they're still a gang. But they don't know that it was a charter that got them. If it was a charter that made them, it could be a charter that dismantled them, right? But we don't know that. So gentrification now, the way we're dealing with it now, is a rediscovery of this property in the city centers, in Harlem. Harlem is going to gentrification at an alarming rate. And this is where I grew up, right? And I mean, you got boutiques and stuff. Now, who's buying this stuff? And then when you go to the brownstones now that were once on the market and abandoned, and they were going for $120,000 for a gutted brownstone, those same brownstones are like $7, $8, $9 million each. And this is Harlem, okay? So you got to ask yourself what's happening. What's happening is about real estate, it's about capitalism, and it's about the fact that real estate values in inner cities is changing as urbanization changes, as people begin to rediscover the blighted property that used to be in the city center. In Newark, it's the same way.
Yes, that's all me.
You from Newark?
Yeah, I am.
Okay, Newark is the same way. You know, in Newark it's the same way. You got these vast areas that could be urban farms. There's nobody's thing. You haven't got a black congressman that's advocating urban farming in the inner cities. And you got these huge tracts, 5, 6, 10 acre vacant lot tracts. What do they want to build there? They're talking about they want to build a combination of housing to bring in middle class artists and families, and they want to mix this type of community they want to build. People got to eat. You got to remember, these communities used to have working people who used to go to work on public transportation, and the work used to be right in the vicinity at the other end of the public transportation. Urbanization changed all of that. Huh? The drug wars, the heroin, the unemployment, the mass incarceration. Now these cities are empty and devastated, and all of this property is laying fallow. So they've rediscovered the property that they abandoned before, and they're pushing the ghetto out to the exurbs, and now they're reoccupying the center of the city. That's what gentrification is. And as you were trying to point out, one of the important things about that is breaking up the political polity of the people. Okay? They've been doing it through gerrymandering and redlining and redistricting before, but now it's straight up, you know, gentrification. Look at New Orleans. You know, over 65% of the people never came back. And New Orleans had a rental rate of what, 80%? 80% of New Orleans didn't own their homes. They rented them. So gentrification is the final stage in post-industrial urbanization. We're no longer in an industrial age, we're in a post-industrial age. Industrial production and manufacturing has been globalized, it's been set outside the country. We're consumers. So you no longer need to live in the inner city next to the mill or next to the factory. Now these are spots where artists can sit up and contemplate their navel, and you know they could order you know quiche, you know, from the local store there. You understand? And they could have summer theater in the park where crack addicts used to shoot up. You understand what I'm saying? So now they sit up in the park and they listen to Shakespeare. And there's no crack addicts, and they're talking about quality of life has changed. So this is about urbanization and how America is developing as a society.
So we still have time for some more questions, and let me stipulate that faculty and grad students are permitted to ask questions.
Right.
Faculty don't want to get trapped off. I understand that. Faculty, you don't have to ask a question.
I'm just saying. So before we get to you, just make sure
Everybody's
waiting.
pointing.
Did I get a text message from someone named Najea or Naomi saying they wanted to ask a question?
Is that Naomi there?
They're the ones hiding their faces right now.
So what was your question, sister?
Maybe you can talk about your experience working with the UN. Like, has that, I don't know, experience changed your, just the way you like give lectures? I don't know if you're giving lectures or if you're.
What's your major?
Community health and American studies.
Community health? American studies? Okay. Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go finish your question.
So just like maybe talk about your experience. In class we talk about a lot of different academics and like how it kind of maybe hinders their activism. So the UN is like.
Well, I got a lot of war stories from Africa, if that's what you mean. But
And Naomi can think about her question in the meantime. Yeah.
no, seriously. The interaction I've had with the UN has been on two levels. I've worked in solidarity with the Puerto Rican liberation movement, and so I did a couple of presentations on anti-colonialism and solidarity with them at the anti-colonial forum in the UN. Every year they revisit Puerto Rico and its status, and on one or two occasions I think I did a presentation there on them. And of course I worked with some of the activists along Bay Brath and some of the Pan Africanists in New York with the different African delegations there. That's one thing, okay? That's really like, not like it really is in reality. It's when you get in Africa and you have to deal with the other side of this. And there I was a caseworker for a Christian organization, the World Church Services, for a little small period of time. And we did pre-INS screening for Africans who were claiming a political asylum. So we did the pre-screening, right? We screened them to see if they had legitimate claims for asylum in the United States, and then we gave our screening assessment to the INS, and they then had hearings, and if they granted them the asylum or whatever. But I was supposed to be their advocate. The caseworker is supposed to be their advocate, right? And of course, there's rules that they have, that the State Department has, and that the World Trade Services have, that made advocating for them very difficult. You know, Like, how do you get a fleeing family that's fleeing in terror at 3 o'clock in the morning from rebels who came in and chopped their father's head off and raped their mother, and they went out the back door and you're going to ask for their birth certificate? You see, that's stupid. They ain't going to have no birth certificate. You see, but if you don't have the birth certificate, then they have to have the witness to say this and no witness to say that, and then they have to write that in an affidavit, and then they can be considered a legitimate. That crap's like, you know me, I ain't trying to hear that. You know, some of these stories were so horrific I couldn't sleep. I mean, horrific stories. You know, and working with the UN, I found one thing, that doing relief work in Africa is determined by much of what I've been saying here. If you ever notice that whenever you see there's a catastrophe in Africa, and this is no put down of white folks' sensitivity to people suffering, like Doctors Without Borders and people who do this type of humanitarian work, Allah should bless them, because they're coming forward to help people in the hour of need. So I'm not trying to diminish the sincerity, the personal sincerity that brings them to do this type of work. But unfortunately, relief work is a reflection of the same notions of white supremacy and white skin privilege that we see every day. You know, the United Nations, like the United Nations HCR, you see, if you ever notice, almost all of the time you see someone describing a humanitarian situation in Africa as a white woman. How many times have you actually seen a black man? You don't see it. And when I was on the ground, I found out why. The reason why is because the agency itself has a proclivity to hire them and put them in positions of responsibility and supervision, and then they become experts in their particular field. And then they move on. And they become experts in the State Department. And of course, they then bring their people in that they know. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy. You know, and I've seen this. I've seen it, you know, I've worked with these people. Some of them now are heads of USAID, certain departments right now as we speak. You know? And so aid work now, at that time, was humanitarian. Now it's been militarized. So no longer are aid workers, United Nations aid workers included, seen as being neutral. You see what I'm saying? They're seen as being part of either the US or French efforts or politics in that particular area. That's what happened with Somalia and the aid program in Somalia that's been popularized in Black Hawk Down. You know, I had the unique fortune of kicking the Willy Bobo with Adid, the one that they was going to get. And he was a very unique character, by the way. And they described him as a warlord. Didn't they describe Adid in Somalia as a warlord? Far from it. Adid was the patriarch of his clan. And he was supported by his clan. He didn't rule no clan with guns and he was the patriarch of his clan. And he explained how Black Hawk Down happened. It's a long story, and you can read it in my book. But what I want to get at is the United Nations, even in its humanitarian work, reflects the institutional racism of the West. We see that with all of these international institutions, whether it's the ICC, the International Criminal Court, whether it's the other international court at The Hague, whether it's the Human Rights Commission, they all have a decided pro-Eurocentric bias, okay, that they try to overcome. But you have to understand that the major donors to these agencies, the UN, are Western nations, you see. And when you hear this in relief work, fully 83% of all of the donations you give to a relief organization goes to run the organization, not to the relief for the person, not to the material person. It's to run the organization. It's to buy the land cruisers. It's to get the cargo. It's to ship this. It's to do this. It's to do that. It's all logistics. So when you give money to the Red Cross, thinking that you're helping people in the Congo, you understand? 10 cents of your dollar would probably reach the Congo, if that. So working with these organizations is okay, but now that the US and the Europeans have weaponized them, so to speak, now it's not safe to do relief work anymore. You know, everybody's trying to snatch a relief worker now. Before, you know, you could go anywhere. When I was working in Northern Ivory Coast, I didn't feel threatened by these idiots that were running around from Lurd in up and down in there. You know, they used to be up in the chop bars, you know, eating light soup and everything with everybody else. And they knew who I was, but they wasn't snatching me and holding me hostage. But my ass ain't going up there now. You understand? Because with this accent, then, nah. So they have changed the whole paradigm of relief work, the United Nations, by succumbing to this control from the West, from America, you know, mainly from the United States, because the United States is the biggest donor to the United Nations.
I know we also have some students for Justice in Palestine representation who might have questions as well. Let them percolate if you ain't ready. Okay. I have a topic of discussion, but I'll save that for later.
What's this?
One of my classes, and maybe some others, are reading Masada, right, in a couple of weeks. So we'll make sure we come close to that
So
toward the
have you
end.
told them about our project?
Not yet. So, all right, okay, so what questions do we have right now? Okay, all right, and so let's do, I'm sorry, can you tell us your name, then you, and then we'll come back to you. Thank you.
My name is Sherry Case. I'm a grad student here. My question is, I know the Black Panthers have a legacy of being kind of like violent and outraged about things, but how do you deal with that outrage without becoming hateful?
Outrage and hate. Outrage and hate. You know, you have people that wanted to, you know, you have a movement up in Newark, to declare violence a public health issue. Any of y'all hear about that? There's a big old movement. You know, some activists were sitting around trying to figure out how they could become relevant. And they said, look, man, you know, black folks is kicking, you know, we're killing each other. So we need to declare, if we declare violence a public health issue, then we could ask the Center for Disease Control to come in and we can get funds, and then people will pay attention to the violence in the black community. Of course, needless to say, they were ahistorical. They didn't understand why mental health institutions was closed in the first place. They didn't understand the role of the state in driving folks crazy, and also who was going to be the therapist, white folks?
Right.
I mean, if you want to declare an area a violent zone, put a yellow ribbon around the Pentagon. That's where you need to go. But anyway, they came up with this, and a brother asked me. He said, "Well, no, we got to deal with violence. No, we got to deal with violence in the black community because violence is killing us in the black community." I said, "That's not what's killing us. Violence is as natural in a human organ, in a mammal or living organism as breathing. The capacity for violence. If an animal or living organism did not have the capacity for violence, it could not defend itself. It would not defend itself. It would not. A lion wouldn't be able to hunt if it wasn't violent. You ever seen a non-violent carnivore? No. You ever seen a non-violent mammal defend its young? Try taking the young from the most peaceful mammal, a rabbit, and see what they'll do to you, or try to do to you. You think this rabbit was a pit bull? So what's up with this rabbit? Really? You know, violence is built into our DNA. It's culture and society that organizes aggression. Aggression is an expression of violence. Culture and society behaviorally organizes it. Okay? So we all have a violent nature. You'll be surprised what you might do in a situation where your life was threatened. You would say, damn. They would say, damn, girlfriend did that to them? Really? She's the most quiet spoken person I know. She almost decapitated her own boy. And when you ask her, what did you do? I don't remember. I blanked out. Oh, you don't got primal on. You went back to your roots there on you got primal. You understand? We all have that capacity. It's aggression. So what we should have been talking about is how do we deal with aggression in our community. Then we start talking about race and gender and the types of things. We talk about interfamily violence, male, female, all these different educational violence, all these different things. Because now we're not talking about physical, just physical aggression, the physical ability. I'm quite sure everybody in here, the most nonviolent person, has seen something that somebody did that outraged them so that they had a violent impulse. If I had a chick, boy, he should have his ass kicked. How many? Everybody, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you could be the most, you say, that's just too much. I mean, I seen something on the Facebook just the other day. I haven't gotten over it yet. And this was this little boy kicking this baby girl. Yeah. Oh, man, I had to get up and start pacing up and down. I was so angry. And I kept asking everybody, so what happened to this kid? He kicked this little baby. He was punching her because he had to watch her. And he didn't know he was on a surveillance camera. And the reason why I was so upset, because I got two babies, 5 and 10, right? And I know the sibling rivalry and what they go through. So I know that the big boy's attitude towards his baby brother comes from me. It comes from me. It just didn't come out the air. He ain't just decided he want to beat his brother up for no reason. It came from the parents. It was the parents. We don't know the difference between aggression and violence. Now, outrage, and what was the other word you used, sister?
I said,
hate.
How are you outraged
without becoming hateful? Okay. You know, I tell my sons, you know, like, I dislike the Cowboys with an intense passion. There's nothing in this world that could happen to the Cowboys that's too good for them. Now, my son, on the other hand, said, we all anti-Cowboys in the house. No other opinion is allowed. But anyway, so my son, in trying to best his baby brother on how much he dislikes the Cowboys, used the word hate. I hate the Cowboys. I said, whoa, hold up. That's a strong word. Dislike, ain't with them, you don't like them, you ain't feeling them. Hatred is a whole different thing. Okay? Hatred is a whole different thing. So you just like the Cowboys. You say, okay, Pops, you got that. So he doesn't use the term hatred no more. Okay? Although I think that maybe with the Cowboys. All right, anyway. So, outrage though. Outrage could be defined as, for the Panther Party. I did join the Panther Party because I was outraged. I was outraged. I was outraged because, see, you think stop and frisk is something new. Mm-hmm. It's as old as the plantation. That's what I was trying to explain to you. We couldn't leave the plantation without a pass. And when we walked through the streets, if more than 3 black folks was walking through the streets, it was a conspiracy. If you came through the streets, you had to have your paperwork in your hand. Hey, boy, where you going? Hey, boss, I was just going down the road. Yeah, all right, nigga, go on. Stop and frisk, right? Stop it. It's old as slavery to us, okay? So stop and frisk ain't nothing new. So when I joined the Black Panther Party, right? I hated police. And you know something? I still do. Ain't nothing changed. I got a little more analysis to it now. I got a little more basis for my hatred. But I still hate them. Because I understand their role and I understand what it does to people, what they do to people. Okay? So I was outraged over the fact that they did what they did and they got away with it. That outraged me. And when black men stood up and challenged it and made them back down, that was the organization for me. Now, of course, when I got in the organization, this became secondary. Didn't matter anymore. My personal hatred was no longer motivating me. What was motivating me now, that I had an organization, that I was able to do something about this pent-up rage that I had, what motivated me now was to put them in their place. was to make sure that they didn't bully people. Because you see, my outrage was based on something that I always felt when I was a kid. I don't like bullies. I never liked bullies. I used to always think of scheme of ways to torture and ambush bullies. I didn't like them. Okay, and to this day I don't like them. And that's what the police represented in my community when I was growing up. They were bullies. Straight away bullies. And they used to act like bullies. And you know that what the major features of a bully is arrogance and ignorance. Arrogance and ignorance based on low self-esteem. So, the Black Panther Party were outraged, but they weren't hateful. Because you see, the motivation for a revolutionary is not hate, it's love. And the Black Panther Party's major motivation was love for black people. So I was outraged that they treated black people the way they did and got away with it. That's why I hated them. When I was able to do something about it, they had to deal with me, and therefore I didn't have to hate them. They had to deal with me. And that's what I'm saying to you. You have to say to yourself, damn, I ain't gonna take this. Them step forward, they got to deal with me. When you take that step, it may cost you something. I mean, my life ain't been the same since I joined the Black Panther Party. It's true. But then again, there was no guarantee I would be here now. Nobody's getting out of this life alive. You know somebody got out of this life alive? Dracula. Dracula, you got it.
All right, so Munir, you have your hand up.
So you were discussing briefly how Obama sort of rewrote Middle Eastern history in his speech in 2009. And if you could maybe expand on that and also talk about how racial segregation in Israel, and as well as anti-blackness that's practiced by the state, is related to the policies of racial segregation, border control, and immigration control.
Boy, you just did it yourself. Boy, y'all some sharp kids, man. I don't mean, you just did it. Damn, man, that was good, man. You should be my speechwriter. You did that joint in like 30 seconds, man. Really? Do that again? Say that again. Seriously. You had a number of things there. The first one was what?
So Obama's speech on the Middle East.
Okay, let me deal with that first, okay? I'm not cutting you off. Let me just try to do it quick. You know, he appeared before the General Assembly. You know, every year the leaders come. Last year they didn't want to let, what's the name from Venezuela in after Hugo Chavez died. And so he got up and he gave a speech about, and you know, his speech is usually the position of America towards the state of Israel. And he got up and he talked about Israel as a bastion of democracy in the Middle East. Okay, which touched on what you were saying about apartheid. We know right now that the Kerry initiative, Kerry is going back and forth in the Middle East, trying to broker some type of jury rig arrangement. You understand? And the major sticking point now is the redefinition of Israel based on what you just said. You see, and the Israelis are not having it. They never did have it. They're not going to relate to that, to their redefinition. A redefinition of Israel will require a singular state. That's not possible. We're dealing with a settler state. You know, the reason why they resist the comparisons to apartheid in South Africa is because they're trying to resist the comparisons of history. South Africa was a European settler state too. And the reason why Mandela went from prison to president is because he decided that he wasn't going to change that paradigm, the essential economic relationship of that paradigm, and give white folks, the apartheid regime, a ride, you know, a pass. And that's why you have the ANC shooting minors. That's why you have the situation you have in South Africa. Israel is different in that as a settler state, it's also an expansionist state. And one of the major features of control of this expansionist state has been the role that it has played for the West in that area, in that region. The military, geopolitical power that it wields in that region. Okay? That was the reason why the Iranian Revolution was so important to destabilizing the U.S. paradigm of power in the region, because the Iranians were a U.S. client. They were the second most powerful military force in the region, and they were armed by the United States. But a lot of people fail to realize that the Iranians are not Arab. And so therefore, and they're not Sunni. So therefore, when the Iranian Revolution jumped off and the Shah was kicked out, This upset the whole paradigm of Sunni hegemony under Western tutelage. The Saudis and all of them had long ago made pacts with the US and the British to protect their regimes and protect their interests in the region. So Israel has always resisted the comparison between itself and apartheid because it points to them as a settler state and creating these different types of balkanization of the population, whether it's physical balkanization, whether it's by rights, whether it's by heritage, or whatever. And then there's the political prisoners and this whole thing. These are the particular features of a settler state. What I'm talking about, when you talk about racial boundaries and borders and passes and all of this stuff, and they also resist the idea, the notion that they're not indigenous people. But we know the history of the settlement of Palestine after World War II, and after World War I, I mean. We know how it came about. So when Obama stood up in the United Nations, he acted as though this history didn't exist. He started talking about Israel as a democratic institution that was supported because it was just, it was democratic, and all of these things, and that flies into the face of the apartheid system of Israel and its expansionist nature. And also we have to understand, finally, about this whole paradigm of settler states, that all settler states settle on land that's geopolitically or economically important. And the Israelis' control of the Jordan Valley and the Jordan River controls all of the water in the region. And that's one of the reasons why that struggle is intractable. The Israelis are controlling more and more of the water. Almost, I think it's something like 63 to 70% of the Jordan River is diverted away from its natural course to Israel. Okay? So that's very, very important to understand. That there's all these sub-struggles that you aren't told. So when Obama stood up in the United Nations, he painted this picture of this poor little country that's besieged by terrorists and intractable, crazy Muslims and Arabs, you understand, who are intent on destroying democracy and taking people back to the Middle Ages. Just like post 9/11. Those people flew planes into the tower of the World Trade Center because they don't like the fact that you wear miniskirts. I mean, serious, they don't like our way of life. Isn't that what you were told? These people did what a person hijacks a plane, commits suicide, takes everybody with him, you understand, changes the paradigm of power forever, and he's doing all of this because you wearing a miniskirt. Really? Don't you think it's a little more profound than that? I mean, maybe this guy, okay, let's just say he's a wacko. Let's just give him the benefit of the doubt. He's crazy. But we know that everybody's insanity begins at home. Every serial killer had a mama. Unless he killed her. I mean, right? Or Jeffrey Dahmer, we see all these guys had sick childhoods, right? Right? So even if we assume that the people that flew this stuff into the World Trade Center were crazy, where did they come from? What made them crazy? And surely it wasn't you wearing a miniskirt. So we need to understand here that these things that are motivating people to do what they do, and then it's reported to us as some harebrained or crazy act, you understand, is not that. Every assassin in America has been a lone assassin. Have you ever seen anybody that was part of a conspiracy? Everybody that killed anybody that was any of significance in the 20th century acted alone. Right or wrong? From Lee Harvey Oswald to the dude that shot the Duke Ferdinand that started World War I. He was a crazy anarchist. Let them tell him. He threw the bomb. He didn't know he wasn't supposed to throw the bomb, and he went and did it anyway. Something crazy stuff. That started World War I. Oswald shot Kennedy. Ruby shot so-and-so. What's the name shot King? No conspiracy. Nobody helped. All crazy person did it. One crazy person. So maybe out of this auditorium will come one crazy person that will run for president of the United States and change everything. Maybe. Maybe there's one person in here that will run for political office and don't want to be in that office. And I'm going to run for this office just for the hell of it. And if I win, I'm going to tear everything up in here, including the office furniture. You know? And then everybody going to say, but you was in office for 3 years, and it's is all you destroyed everything. Isn't that a great record? I know y'all gonna vote for me, but I'm not running again. You know, let the next guy come in and clean it all up. Let him, that be his campaign. So, yeah, you know, these types of perceptions are very important. Obama knows how to rewrite history. He got great speechwriters. He knows that. Oh, people don't understand, black folks don't understand, who drank the Obama age, that Obama's election and the ascendancy to the presidency was the worst thing that happened to black folks since Reconstruction. It's the worst thing that happened to us since Reconstruction. And we have yet to pay for it. And the bad part about this is that when this Negro get out of office, he's going to be a senior statesman. Everybody in America is going to be kissing his ass that's black. He's going to be calling all the shots. And you know he's setting it up now because he set up a fund for anti-poverty or organizations that want to do work in the community. He set up a special commission of corporations who are going to donate to projects that work in poor communities. So when he comes out of office, he's going to have access to all of this money to finance, research. So you're going to see some of you right here going to get jobs. Y'all could be a researcher for the Obama Institute. You understand? And come up with solutions that don't solve nothing. You know? Conclusions that don't conclude, like Fred Hampton said. So, yeah, that's real.
Okay. So, we are short on time because we have to vacate this supposedly another event. And we want to give time for a few people to get books signed. So I actually like to close this one topic of discussion since a few people here should still be in Black world literature, and we're going to read Assata's autobiography in a couple of weeks, and certainly in the shadow of this ever-increasing bounty placed on her head by the U.S. government, which is now $2 million, right? And I was wondering, like, if you might say something that might guide their engagement with Assata Shakur's words, or you can say something about what they might do after reading Assata Shakur's words.
Well, I don't know how many non-blacks in here have read Assata. How many white women in here have read Assata? Well, one of the things that you should do, the sisters in here that read Assata, y'all should let them get access to the book. They should read it. You should read it. Assata Shakur was a member of the Black Panther Party. She started out in college. Assata was a student just like you. And she went to Manhattan Community College in Harlem. And her major was, I think she was majoring in nursing or some medical degree. And so she came down and to join the party in the summer of '69, I think. Summer '69? Yeah, summer '69. And she came into the Black Panther office and she wanted to join. And so she became part of the cadre from Washington Heights in Harlem. And because of her background studying medical stuff, she began to work as one of our medical cadre. You know, doing the free health, we had free health clinics, giving people tests for sickle cell anemia and stuff like that. You didn't know that the Black Panther Party started free health clinics in the black community, did you? So it was all outraged and hateful, right? You didn't know that, did you? Yeah, we had free health clinics. And of course back then, you know, leukemia and stuff like that was considered a black disease and high blood pressure. So what we did is we got volunteer medical students and doctors, and we opened up clinics. After the breakfast program, we would open it up, we would let people come into the community, and we would give them free blood tests. We would take their blood pressure and all of that stuff, and we would, we had these health clinics and started treating little minor stuff. So yeah, we had free health clinics. The biggest one was in San Francisco, LA. And so we had free health clinics. We started the free breakfast program, y'all know that, right? Mm-hmm. You wouldn't have breakfast in school right now for working for us. So big up for Black Panther Party. You know, a lot of programs that, see, this is what we were talking about. A lot of things that we take for granted today came out of black radical traditions. You know, they didn't come from, you know, civil rights demonstrations. They came from black radical traditions. They came from the system trying to ameliorate the upsurge of radicalism. Now, Asada was unique in that when she came into the party was under the pressure of the counterintelligence program and was about to split. Okay? And she was on the East Coast, and so when the party began to split, she was organized into the medical cadre underground. You know, black folks had an underground in America. Did you know that? And it wasn't the Underground Railroad. We had that one too, but that was back in the bullwhip days. You know, back in the 60s, we had an underground. And to this day, there are families and brothers and sisters, you know, who used to let us use their house, their resources, and you would never know who they were. They'd be the last person that you would look at today. You'd probably look at some grandmother and she'd tell you, I ran a Black Liberation Army safe house. Really? Grandma? Yeah, you didn't know that, did you? Yeah, they had the machine guns up in here with the PRA safe house. But I was cool. Yeah, you didn't know that. Yeah, so there's a lot of people that used to help us, you know, and Asada was charged with medical cadre underground. So what that entailed was liaisons with Harlem Hospital. So if one of us got wounded, you know, in America, if you got a gunshot wound, they have to report it. And if you go to an emergency with a gunshot wound, they have to report it. So what we had to do is we had to have our own emergency room so we wouldn't have to report gunshot wounds. And so we would have our own little operating theater, and Asada had access to, you know, to some of the facilities like Harlem Hospital. So we were able to get stuff, and then we had you know, the free health clinic doctors, you know, mums was the word. So if somebody got shot up, you know, we had a spot for them. And so we had an underground, and that underground existed all up until the time that Asada was captured, and then she was broke out of prison, and she's in Cuba now. So the Black Underground existed, and the BLA existed, and so I'm trying to give you all some ideas on resistance here. You understand what I'm saying? You know, something that's everybody's business is nobody's business. So when you step forward, you know, you can step forward and do what you think you have to do. You know, all I just try to ask you is to be guided by love and not hate, to be guided by a desire to bring bullies low, and to bring oppressors low, to make tyrants give up their power. You know, so do what you think you have to do, but just remember that there were times when there were ordinary people. It could have been your grandmama, it could have been your great aunt, that used to help us. They used to be part of us, that loved and cared for us. And to them, we weren't just hate-filled, you know, gun-toting militants. We were freedom fighters. And that's how I think we should look at it. And Asada was a freedom fighter. And she still is a freedom fighter. And she's in Cuba, and if it wasn't for the Cuban Revolution, Asada wouldn't be free. If it wasn't for the people of Cuba, Asada wouldn't be free. So we need to try to understand what is the United States policies towards Cuba, and what is it based on if a Cuban Revolution is giving freedom and giving asylum to one of our freedom fighters. Okay? You have to really look at the Cuban Revolution, and look at the Cuban people, and look at Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro is one of the foremost supporters of Pan Africanism and African liberation and anti-colonialism than any other living leader on the planet. On the planet. Cuba has sent more doctors to Africa than any other country in the world. Doctors. Cuba has sent their sons to fight beside liberation movements against the racist regime that used to be Rhodesia, and it used to be South Africa. So someone like Cuba's Fidel Castro, who's been painted as a pariah, as an evil dictator, has been the foremost humane supporter of African people. He has trained more African doctors than anybody on the planet. When I got a scar across my stomach from an exploding appendix when I was in Africa. When they rushed me to the hospital, the guy that operated on me and saved my life was trained in Cuba. He was an African doctor trained in Cuba. So we need to understand that the heroes and sheroes that we have living amongst us today are very, very real. And we should try to appreciate them while they're here.
Thank you. So the book table has just been moved just outside the door. So if you want to get a book or if you want to get a book signed, we'll be doing that for a couple more minutes.